Alrighty, I am pleased to be joined by Alex from the Lights Out F1 podcast. How's it going, Alex?
Oh, going pretty good. How are you, JJ?
I'm doing great. Again, thanks for coming on. We haven't talked about F1 in a while. We talked about, well, actually, we haven't really talked about racing. The last time we probably talked about it was NASCAR back in June. I think we talked about Formula One back in either March or April, but it's been a while. But again, thanks for coming on. And if you want to tell us, before we start talking about the season, if you want to tell us more about your podcast, how you do it, how long you've been doing it for, basically all that type of jazz.
Yeah, for sure. So my wife, Eileen, and I, we've started a Formula One podcast actually just for this season. I've been a fan for a few years and kind of slowly started trickling into her life a little bit more. And she kept having really good rebuttals and kind of kept saying a lot of things that a lot of the announcers and a lot of guys that we watch on YouTube and other channels that they weren't saying, or they were saying maybe a week later. So I thought, man, I just need to kind of get her on camera more. So that's kind of what we did this season. And we've gone and watched every single race so far. And we've talked about every race after each race on Sunday. And we kind of try to put it out within a couple hours after the race. So we have the podcast on YouTube right now, and then it's slowly growing. We have a couple goals set, and so if you guys want to check out, it's Lights Out F1 on YouTube for sure. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, no problem. Again, all your information for your podcast and all the links that we can get it will be down in the description below. So let's talk about this season. This season has gotten very interesting, and for the first time in a while, for the first time in a while, it's pretty competitive. Max Verstappen currently leads, but Lewis Hamilton's right on the fringe there. It seems like this year, too, for the Constructors' Cup, Red Bull's probably going to end up winning. But, I mean, what have you thought about the season so far?
Honestly, it's been the best season since probably 2016, and it's been a nail biter. Whether you're a Lewis Hamilton fan or a Verstappen fan, it's been going back and forth. Where the first part of the season, it would look like Max was maybe going to be able to kind of do some things, but then Lewis kind of came back, and it's just been probably, like I said, the best season so far in the last few years for sure.
Yeah, and I think before the season, a lot of people thought a Red Bull would be very competitive and maybe give Mercedes a run for their money. It seems like that's happening this year. We mentioned it before we started recording that there's kind of a rivalry now between Verstappen and Hamilton, and the last few races they've been going at each other. How do you think this is an actual rivalry, or do you think it's just a phase?
I think, my personal thought is that Mercedes is trying to end this era with this hybrid era, with this last year being with this type of car before they change over for the 2022 season. And I think they want to win every single year, which they have done so far. And I think Red Bull is also trying to make that not happen. And I think they're giving them a really good run for their money. And I think this year, Red Bull definitely has the faster car for sure. The lighter car, it's just a really good car right now.
Yeah, again, like I said, before the season started, I think a lot of people were very high on Red Bull, and they thought that the last few years Red Bull has raced pretty well, but they haven't exactly got that top level, and Mercedes has dominated. But yeah, it's really interesting how that works, and it's gonna be fun to watch as we get into the later races. You said there's only 8 races left. But of course, tell us about the last race. Daniel Ricardo wins. He's a fan favorite, but can you tell us more about the last race F1 had?
Yeah, so the last race was in Monza. It was the Italian GP, and it was a really good race. We had our second sprint for the year, and this year they have decided to have 3 sprints to kind of change it up, trying to get more younger crowd kind of watching. So the sprint race kind of started the weekend off with McLaren kind of making some good moves. They really had some good starts. And so that kind of started the main race on Sunday with Verstappen and Daniel Ricardo on the front row. And since lights out right at the first lap, Daniel Ricardo took it over and kind of had it the whole time. And so the kind of race kind of progressed on a little bit, and then the first pit stops started happening, and that there was some issues that happened with Verstappen, kind of was in the pits a little too long, and it caused him to come out a little later than he should have. Then Lewis Hamilton pitted, and that kind of his was a little slow too, and that kind of caused him to have a delay, and they came out right on top of each other, and literally going out of the first turn into the second turn. If you guys know anything about Monza, the very first turn, it's a very sharp chicane made for people to kind of make mistakes, and one thing led to another, and they were on top of each other and kind of out of the race for the rest of the time. So that kind of left the middle of the field, the middle of the pack, kind of fighting for some podiums, and that's where we saw McLaren with Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris kind of going 1-2 for that race. It was pretty epic.
Yeah, and I think I know Ricardo's a fan favorite, and a lot of times I think he's gone on. I listened to a little Pardon My Take, and he's been on there a few times, and he seems like a cool dude. He seems like he really likes going to the U.S. whenever he gets a chance to. So that was pretty cool. Do you think there's a chance that he gets anywhere in the top 5 this year? Because I think currently he's in 8th or 9th for the standings, but do you think there's a chance that he gets somewhere in the top 5 by the end of the year?
I mean, if he kind of keeps the momentum going the way he's doing right now, I think there's a strong possibility. I think McLaren has a really good car. I think his teammate really right now is dominant. And I think anything is possible with Daniel. He's a really, really good driver, and we haven't seen the best of him yet. So I think I'm hopeful for it, honestly.
Yeah, and speaking of his teammate Lando Norris, he's had pretty well, and Lando Norris has had a pretty solid season. I think currently he's in 4th. But what have you thought about his season so far?
His best so far for the few years that he's been in Formula One, and he's actually competing with Max and with Lewis right now. He was 3rd in the standings up until kind of recently when Valtteri kind of started picking up his pace and started to get some wins under his belt, or some podiums really. But Lando is definitely setting the bar over at McLaren, and Daniel needs to keep up, and which he seems like he is. And with last 2 weeks ago in Monza, he really showed that he's starting to be comfortable in that car.
Yeah, and before we kind of jump off because I kind of want to ask a little some more Daniel Ricciardo questions, but when he joined McLaren, I think it was this season. What was your expectation? Did you think he would have a really good season, or what was the expectations for Daniel Ricciardo before the season started?
I think because before this year he was in Renault, and he was in Renault for only 2 years, and if you kind of follow his progression, it took him really over a year to really get good in Renault, but there was a lot of other issues involved with that as well. So my expectation was probably going to take him, 6 to half a season, 6 races to a half a season to really kind of get really maybe where Lando is. And I mean, it's, we're just kind of past the halfway mark, and we're kind of now seeing Daniel step into his role as a really good veteran.
Yeah. And it's been fun to watch, especially his progression. He's been with a few teams now, but and especially when he does well, I feel like that's better for the sport overall. So again, I'm excited for Daniel Ricciardo. Anyways, is there anybody that you're kind of shocked with, but that has really impressed you this season, or any type of driver that you've kind of been, wow, you didn't expect them to do well, but they're doing pretty well right now?
Honestly, I would say Pierre Gasly. He's kind of been one of the middle of the field, kind of, not a whole lot of people have been, watching a whole lot. I mean, some of the commentating, people see him doing well, and he's probably gotten points, I think, in every single race, but maybe 1 or 2. And he's had a really good season. I think he deserves a better car than what he's in, for sure.
Yeah. And I think, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure. I'm really shocked by a lot of the performances right now. I think a lot of people had, and I think included myself, it was Verstappen and Hamilton somewhere in there. But to be honest with you, I don't know if I really saw anybody coming out of nowhere. What have you really thought about Verstappen's performance this year? Because it seems like he's had one of his best seasons, but lately he's been kind of struggling a little bit. But what have you thought about Verstappen so far?
Yeah, I mean, he's been in the lead in F1 for a while now, so he's not really a rookie anymore. He's kind of like, he's like right in his middle ground, like not a veteran yet. And I think he's performing well. He's got a little bit of maturing to do, for some people would say. But I think, he's performing well. He's got one of the best cars underneath him. And when he's on, he's really unbeatable. And I think this year is his best chance to get the championship. It's better now than never, I guess, right?
Yeah. And this might be a while, and I'm not exactly sure when Lewis Hamilton's going to end up stop racing and go to some other thing. But do you think Verstappen can be the next Hamilton, where he dominates, wins 4 or 5 straight F1 seasons? Do you think let me rephrase that. Do you think Verstappen can be the next Lewis Hamilton?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm going to say no. I think there's a lot of other factors involved, especially right now when Lewis kind of leaves the F1 world. I think we got George Russell, we got Carlos Sainz, we got a lot of people that are really going to give Max a run for his money if the cars are running right. And I think the 2022 cars, we'll see how that goes next year, because the cars should be completely different and there should be a totally different type of racing.
Yeah, speaking of speaking of having the new next gen or the next type of car, can you tell us more about that? Because I know F1 is just changing up a lot of things for next season and making it more competitive so other teams can maybe catch up to the big teams like Red Bull and Mercedes. But can you explain a little more about that for next season?
Yeah. So next year they are releasing the whole new car, which they were trying to do for the 2021, but due to COVID, they kind of delayed it again for a year for the whole new. This is like the new 2020 era of F1 racing. So it's supposed to be a car that allows for a lot more close racing, because right now, currently, when cars get really close to each other, it's kind of hard for them to overtake. There's a lot of issues that happen. So now with the new cars, it kind of directs the hot air up and over the cars behind them. So hopefully there'll be a lot more overtakes, a lot more passing. It makes it a lot more thrilling for fans like myself. And that's kind of the whole point right now with the Formula One world. They want to get more American fans involved. And this is kind of what we're asking for: more passing, more thrills, not really more crashes, but definitely want to see them kind of pushing the line a little bit.
Yeah, because it seems like Mercedes and Red Bull, for the most part, dominates, and there really hasn't been another team really close. What team do you think, and maybe it's McLaren, maybe it's Ferrari, but what team do you think is the most closest after Mercedes, or who's number 3 for the team? I know it goes Red Bull, Mercedes, but who's after that?
Honestly, it's really McLaren, Ferrari. Those two are kind of fighting for that third position right now. And, Ferrari is a traditional F1 team. Anyone that kind of doesn't really know anything about Formula One, you say, Ferrari, it's kind of synonymous with Formula One. And the fact that they've kind of had some struggles the last few years, to kind of see them trying to fight for 3, that's kind of where we're at right now. And so that might change next year. So we'll see.
Yeah. And, because I think I was going to say, because Red Bull and Mercedes dominates for the most part, but it was really hard to see who that number 3 team was. And I thought it was McLaren, and then I thought after that would have been Ferrari, but I wasn't exactly sure. And it's very interesting how that works. But now that once the new cars come out for next year, who do you think can compete with Mercedes and Red Bull, or would it just be basically the same with the way it is now?
I think Red Bull is going to struggle next year a little bit with their car. Okay. If you want me to be honest with you, I think they put a lot of effort into this season. Yeah, I know they're working on next year, but I think their focus has been trying to win this season so much that they've kind of been on the back burner, where you wouldn't be surprised to see Williams or even Haas next year doing really, really well, because they've put so much effort into next year's car that they've kind of left this year's car. They've kind of not really done a whole lot of upgrades. So they've been focused more on that. So I think they've had a lot more time for testing, wind tunnel testing, and all that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of people are going to be surprised and see Williams a much higher ranking than where they are currently these last few years.
That was interesting you mentioned Haas, because I know Haas is basically one of the worst, or if the worst, racing teams in Formula One. And I know they just got in a few years ago, and yeah, it seems like they try really hard, but yet they just can't quite get there. I know they have a NASCAR team with Stewart Haas Racing, and they're solid, but this year they're not having a great year at all. But it seems like Haas, and you mentioned that's interesting, because I always thought Haas was kind of down there, and there wasn't really any way they could go up. But I mean, that would be very interesting to watch and see how well they do next year. And I think, and I believe Haas is the only American racing team, correct?
That's correct. They are an American racing team with, Gene Haas involved. And they've these last few years, they've kind of had some struggles, but, so this year they've had 2 rookies. And if anyone knows anything about Formula One, it's Michael Schumacher's son is in one of those cars right now. And I think they have a good opportunity for next year, and I'm very optimistic for next year for them.
Yeah, and speaking of Michael Schumacher's son, when do you think he'll get his first win in Formula One, or do you think it'll be a while before he can actually get the checkered flag?
Yeah, I'm going to say definitely 2022 and beyond. I don't think this year Mick really has anything he can do with the car that he has. I think we'll have to see how the car progresses into the new decade of the new car era.
Yeah. And because I think I was talking when we talked about Formula One for the first time, I kind of mentioned Mick Schumacher a little bit, and they were thinking I would have a solid season, but since he was with Haas, he would probably struggle. And I understand with just racing in general, you have to have a solid team to actually be successful, because if you don't have a great team, you're going to really struggle. You're not going to be able to win, because a lot of it has to do with what kind of car you drive. But I mean, I would like to see, especially for Haas being an American team, and to finally see that success. But we'll see what happens next year.
Yeah.
And is there any other predictions you have that you could see? Because I know we're kind of getting to the end here for Formula One for this season, but do you see any really surprises happening?
I think the top 2 are pretty much set in stone on who's going to win. It's either going to be Lewis or Max, but I think that third place is going to be the surprising one. And my pick is it's Lando Norris. I think he proved himself this year already, and I think he's going to continue to do that and finish the season strong. And I think he's going to surprise a lot of people and take third. Yeah.
And that would be, because Lando Norris, solid driver, and especially with a pretty solid team this year, him and Ricardo with McLaren. I don't know if you really have a racing team, but if you want to tell us more about what your favorite team is and what your expectation for them is, or I don't know, did you mention who your favorite racing team is for F1?
I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but it's McLaren, and it's been McLaren for a while. When I was younger, I kind of watched Lewis start his career. And he was on McLaren, and then he left. And then these last few years, McLaren's kind of slowly kind of made a rebound and kind of come back up a little bit strong. And they got a really nice team right now with Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, and they're a fun team. They're a young team. They're on social media a lot. They just pump out content, and they're fun to watch and fun to be around. And I think that team is the team that will help break F1 more into the American market, I believe.
Yeah, and again, as we've been mentioning him a lot, but Daniel Ricciardo really likes coming to the U.S., and he really has kind of he has kind of fans, like a lot of fans here in the U.S. I think there's getting to be more fans in the U.S., and I feel like they're starting to like Daniel Ricciardo more. So that's very interesting to point out that. And again, thanks for coming on, Alex. I don't know if I have any more questions at the moment, but if you want to tell us more about if you have any in store for your podcast, stuff like that.
Yeah, I appreciate it, JJ. We're kind of a new podcast, and so I appreciate you reaching out and asking us to come out. Unfortunately, Eileen wasn't able to make it. She's traveling a lot for work, but really goals for our podcast is to kind of continue to do reviews after each race, and kind of continue to grow our fans and our fan base, and then slowly try to get involved in going to some of these races and doing our podcast live at the races. And right now we're on track with our goals. And, anytime I can, reach out to other podcasters and anything like that, I do it, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, thanks for coming on. I enjoy talking about racing. And again, we haven't really talked a whole lot about it just because we haven't got the chance to, but I saw that we had a chance to talk F1, and I wanted to mention it more. And again, as you've mentioned and I've mentioned too, that it's starting to have a fan support here in the U.S., which is fun to watch. And especially with the U.S. mostly being a NASCAR market, but that seems not to be as big as it once was, and F1 seems to get more of a hold. But again, it's always fun to talk about both. I think that's all I have for today. But again, thanks for coming, Alex. You can check out the Lights Out F1 podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You mentioned again, you're on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff.
Yeah, all that's good stuff. It's Twitter, Instagram is kind of where we pump out most of our stuff. But YouTube is the main stuff for our live podcast. I appreciate it, JJ. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. And again, don't forget to check out the Lights Out F1 podcast. The links will be down in the description below. All right. Thanks for coming on, Alex. Enjoy the rest of the season and have a wonderful night.
All right. Thank you.